Sarah Chen stood at the entrance of the Galactic Academy of Xenobiology, her heart pounding against her chest as she stared up at the massive crystalline towers that seemed to defy gravity. The morning light of 3 suns scattered through the structure, creating rainbow patterns across her standard-issue environment suit. She double-checked the seal on her helmet, a necessary precaution in an atmosphere optimized for dozens of different species, none of them human. "Welcome, Student Chen," a melodic voice chimed from somewhere above. "Please proceed to decontamination." As she walked through the shimmering barrier, Sarah couldn't help but smile. After 2 years of applications, vaccinations, and diplomatic negotiations, she was finally here, the first human to ever attend the most prestigious xenobiology institution in the known universe. The decontamination process finished with a soft chime, and a holographic arrow appeared, guiding her toward orientation. Sarah followed it through corridors that twisted in ways that made her Earth-trained eyes struggle to focus. Around her, beings of all shapes and sizes moved with practiced ease, some floating, others crawling, and a few that seemed to phase in and out of existence as they walked. "You must be the human." The voice came from behind her, high-pitched and excited. Sarah turned to find herself face to face with what looked like a shimmering cloud of iridescent particles roughly shaped into a humanoid form. 2 bright spots of light served as eyes, and they were focused intently on her. "I'm Xyloxa," the being continued, particles swirling faster with apparent excitement. "I've never seen a human up close before. Your physical form is so defined, so solid." Sarah smiled, thankful that the universal translators worked as well as promised. "Nice to meet you, Xyloxa. I'm Sarah Chen. Are you also here for first-year orientation?" "Yes. I'm a symbionite, by the way. We're known for our ability to share consciousness with other species." Xylox's form rippled with what Sarah assumed was enthusiasm. "I've been reading all about humans since I heard one would be attending. Is it true that your species has never successfully merged consciousness with any other?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm slightly. It was a sensitive topic. Humanity's apparent inability to participate in consciousness sharing was often cited as proof of their primitive nature. "That's correct," she said carefully. "Though we haven't had many opportunities to try." "Fascinating." Xyloxa floated closer, those bright eyes studying her intently. Would you perhaps consider letting me try? For science, of course." Before Sarah could respond, a deep gonging sound echoed through the halls. Orientation was beginning. "We should probably head to the assembly hall," Sarah said, grateful for the interruption. "But maybe we can talk more about it later." Throughout the orientation, Sarah found her attention divided between the dean's welcome speech and Xylox's constant movement beside her. The symbionite seemed unable to sit still, particles swirling in complex patterns whenever the dean mentioned anything about interspecies cooperation or practical laboratory work. As they filed out of the assembly hall afterward, Xyloxa practically bounced alongside her. "Sarah, we've been assigned as lab partners. Isn't that wonderful? We can learn so much from each other." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. She'd come to the academy hoping to prove that humans were more than the galaxy's newest curiosity. Now she had a lab partner who seemed to view her as exactly that, a fascinating specimen to be studied. Still, as she watched Xylox's enthusiastic display of swirling particles, she couldn't help but feel intrigued. Maybe this partnership was exactly what she needed, someone who saw humanity's differences not as shortcomings, but as mysteries to be explored. "Looking forward to working with you, Xyloxa," she said, and meant it. Whatever came next, it would certainly be interesting. 2 weeks into the semester, Sarah found herself spending most evenings in the Academy's Library of Living Knowledge, surrounded by floating data crystals that contained centuries of xenobiological research. Her eyes were tired from reading countless studies about failed human symbionite merging attempts, each one more discouraging than the last. "You're here late again." Xylox's familiar voice chimed as the symbionite materialized next to her study station. Today, their particle form had a slight purple tinge, which Sarah had learned indicated curiosity. Just trying to understand why we're so different, Sarah replied, gesturing at the holographic display showing yet another failed experiment. Every other species can share consciousness with symbionites. Even the crystalline hive minds from Rigel 7 managed it. Zilix's form dimmed slightly, their equivalent of a sympathetic frown. You know, most species look down on humans because of this. They think you're... The symbionite paused, particles swirling uncertainly. Primitive. Sarah finished the sentence. Yeah, I heard that one before. But that's not what I think. Zilix had brightened suddenly. In fact, I have something to show you. Come with me. Sarah followed her lab partner through the twisting corridors of the academy. At this hour, the halls were mostly empty, though occasionally they passed other students, some floating in anti-gravity fields, others moving on multiple legs or no legs at all. They arrived at Laboratory 7, one of the smaller research rooms used for consciousness studies. Zilix pressed their hand equivalent against the scanner, and the door hummed open. This is where my parent cluster did their research, Zilix explained, activating the room's holographic systems. They were obsessed with understanding why humans were different. The air filled with detailed neural scans of various species during consciousness sharing. Sarah recognized the patterns from her textbooks, the flowing neural pathways of the Aquarians, the crystalline thought structures of the Rigelians, and the quantum consciousness patterns of the symbionites themselves. And this, Zilix said softly, pulling up one final scan, is a human brain during an attempted merge. Sarah leaned forward, fascinated. Unlike the other scans, which showed clear patterns of interaction with symbionite consciousness, the human scan was completely different. Instead of opening up to the merge, the human brain seemed to be actively processing it, analyzing it, trying to make sense of it. Do you see? Zilix asked excitedly. Every other species passively accepts the merge. But humans try to understand it. Your brains don't just receive. They question, analyze, and attempt to control the process. Sarah stared at the scan, a new understanding dawning. We're not failing to connect. We're trying to connect differently. Exactly. Zilix's particles spun in rapid excitement. My parent cluster theorized that humans evolved a completely different type of consciousness sharing. Instead of broad, open sharing like other species, you develop precise, controlled sharing. Is that why we can teach each other so effectively? Sarah wondered aloud. Why we can share complex ideas through language and art? Possibly. Zilix moved closer to the hologram. But here's the really interesting part. No one has ever tried to adapt the merging process to work with human consciousness patterns. They just assumed humans were incompatible and gave up. Sarah felt a spark of hope. So theoretically, if we could modify the merge to work with our type of consciousness, it might be possible, Zilix finished. But it would be dangerous. No one has ever successfully modified the merging process before. The Academy strictly forbids such experiments after. Well, there were incidents. Sarah looked at her friend, seeing the concern in their swirling particles. But she also saw excitement, curiosity, and something else. Belief. Zilix actually believed humans weren't inferior, just different. Well, Sarah said, a determined smile forming on her face. Good thing we're in the best xenobiology program in the galaxy. If anyone can figure this out, it's us. Zilix's form brightened considerably. Us? You mean you want to try? Yeah. Sarah nodded, her eyes still fixed on the neural scans. I think it's time someone proved what humans are really capable of. Sarah spent the next week practically living in Laboratory 7. Between regular classes, she and Zilix worked tirelessly on their secret project. The lab's walls were now covered with holographic displays showing various consciousness patterns, with Sarah's own brain scans prominently featured in the center. Look at this, Sarah said one evening, pointing to a particular pattern in her neural scan. See how the waves move. It's almost like they're searching for something. Xyloxa floated closer, their particles forming tight, concentrated patterns, their version of intense focus. You're right. And look at how they react when exposed to symbionite consciousness. They brought up another scan, overlaying it with Sarah's. Your brain isn't rejecting the connection. It's trying to tune it. Sarah jumped up from her chair, excitement making her forget about her fatigue. That's it. We've been thinking about this all wrong. It's like radio waves. She grabbed a light pen and began drawing in the air. Other species naturally broadcast and receive on the same frequency, but humans operate on a completely different wavelength. Explain. Xylox's form rippled with curiosity. Okay, think about it this way, Sarah said, drawing more diagrams in the air. Symbionites and other species share consciousness like a wide-open broadcast, everyone tuned to the same frequency. But humans. She drew a series of precise, controlled waves. We evolved to be more selective. We don't broadcast widely. We form specific, targeted connections. Xylox's particles began spinning faster. That's why human emotional bonds are so strong. You're naturally wired for focused, one-on-one connections rather than group sharing. Exactly. Sarah grinned. And look at this. She pulled up data from their previous experiments. Every time a symbionite tries to merge with a human, they're broadcasting on what we might call an open frequency. But human consciousness operates on a narrow frequency. We're not receiving the signal because we're tuned to a different channel. So theoretically, Xyloxa moved excitedly through the holographic displays. If we could adjust the merging frequency to match human consciousness patterns, we could make it work. Sarah finished. She paused, her excitement tempered by sudden realization. But how do we even begin to modify something as complex as consciousness sharing? Xyloxa dimmed slightly, thinking. My species has ancient techniques for adjusting our consciousness patterns. They're usually only taught to advanced students, but their form brightened again. My parent cluster left detailed notes in the Academy database. With those and your understanding of human consciousness, they were interrupted by the lab door sliding open. Both froze as Professor Xentel, their advanced xenobiology instructor, stepped in. The tall, multi-limbed alien looked at the displays, then at them. Interesting research, the professor said, multiple eyes blinking in sequence, particularly since consciousness modification studies are strictly forbidden to first-year students. Sarah felt her heart sink. Professor, we can explain. No need. Professor Xentel raised two of their limbs. I've been watching your progress. Your hypothesis about human consciousness frequencies is intriguing. They moved closer to examine the displays. Though I should remind you that unauthorized experimentation could result in immediate expulsion. Sarah and Xyloxa exchanged worried looks. However, the professor continued, if you were to submit a formal research proposal with faculty supervision. They left the sentence hanging. You'd support our research? Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope. The Academy's purpose is to expand our understanding of all species, Professor Xentel replied, even ones that operate on different frequencies. Was that a smile on their alien face? Submit your proposal by next week, and please use Laboratory 12 instead. It has better equipment for consciousness studies. After the professor left, Sarah and Xyloxa could hardly contain their excitement. We did it. Xylox's particles danced in the air. We can actually do this properly now. Sarah nodded, already thinking about their research proposal. Yeah, but we better make it good. Something tells me a lot of people will be watching this experiment very closely. Let them watch, Xyloxa said confidently. We're about to change everything they think they know about human consciousness. Laboratory 12 was everything Professor Xentel had promised and more. The room hummed with advanced consciousness monitoring equipment, and the neural interfaces were the latest models. Sarah and Xyloxa had spent 3 weeks here now, running simulation after simulation, fine-tuning their approach. Neural Pattern Synchronization Test Number 47. Sarah spoke into the lab's recording system. She lay back in the testing chair, electrodes attached to her temples. Across the room, Xylox's particle form pulsed with a gentle blue light, their color of concentration. "Are you sure about trying a higher frequency?" Xyloxa asked, their voice carrying a note of worry. "The last test at this level caused you a headache. We need to push the boundaries," Sarah replied, adjusting the neural interface. "Besides, the simulations show this frequency range matches human consciousness patterns better." Professor Xentel moved around them, all 6 eyes focused on the monitoring equipment. "Remember, at the first sign of neural distress, we stop." They paused, adding, "The Academy Board is particularly interested in tomorrow's demonstration. No pressure, of course." Sarah tried not to think about that. Word had spread about their research, and now half the xenobiology department seemed to be watching their progress. Some faculty members were excited about the possibilities, while others openly doubted that a first-year human student could succeed where centuries of research had failed. "Beginning consciousness wave adjustment," Xyloxa announced. Their particle forms started to pulse in a specific rhythm, matching the frequency they calculated would work with human neural patterns. Sarah felt the familiar tingling in her mind as the interface activated. The sensation was stronger this time, more focused. On the holographic displays around them, her brain patterns began to shift, trying to align with Xylox's consciousness waves. "Neural alignment at 15%, Professor Xentel reported. 20%, 25%. Sarah concentrated, remembering their theory. Human consciousness wasn't meant to be wide open. It was precise, controlled. Instead of trying to broadcast widely like other species, she focused on creating a specific, targeted connection. 40% alignment, 45%. The tingling intensified. Sarah could feel something new at the edges of her consciousness, like a door slowly opening. Previous tests had never gotten past 50% alignment. 60% alignment. This is unprecedented. Professor Xentel's multiple limbs moved rapidly across the control panels. Neural stability holding. Suddenly, Sarah felt it. A distinct presence, different from the usual testing sensations. "Xyloxa," she whispered. I think I can sense you too." Xylox's particles swirled with excitement. Not like other merges, but it's definitely a connection. 75% alignment. Professor Xentel announced, their voice tense with excitement. 80%. The connection grew stronger. Sarah could feel Xylox's consciousness, not overwhelming her own, but existing alongside it, like 2 instruments playing in harmony. Then the warning alarms started blaring. Neural pressure increasing. Professor Xentel called out, "Sarah, your mind is trying to establish boundaries around the connection. This wasn't in the simulations." "It's okay," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "This is what humans do. We don't just accept connections, we shape them." The displays showed her neural patterns actively molding the connection, creating specific pathways instead of the usual open merge. It was demanding more energy than they'd anticipated, but it was working. 90% alignment. But the power consumption is concerning. Professor Xentel warned. "Perhaps we should." "Just a little more," Sarah insisted. She could feel they were close to something important. The connection with Xyloxa was nearly complete, but in a way that had never been documented before. 95% alignment. Sarah's head was pounding now, but she held on. Tomorrow they would have to demonstrate their progress to the Academy Board. They needed to prove this was possible. The humans weren't evolutionarily stunted. They were just different. "Sarah," Xylox's voice came both through the air and, faintly, through their growing connection. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we've already proven something important." Sarah smiled despite the discomfort. "Yeah, what's that?" "That sometimes the most interesting discoveries happen when we stop trying to make different species fit the same pattern." The neural displays continued to flash warnings, but Sarah barely noticed them now. Tomorrow would be their big test, but right now, In this moment, they were making history, one carefully controlled connection at a time. The demonstration chamber was packed. Sarah tried not to look at the audience as she settled into the testing chair. Members of the Academy Board filled the observation deck above, their various forms, from crystalline to gaseous, all focused intently on the proceedings below. Near the back, she spotted several human diplomats who had arrived specifically for this demonstration. Neural interfaces online, Professor Xental announced, their multiple limbs working efficiently across the control panels. Consciousness monitoring systems active. Zilixa hovered next to Sarah, their particle form shifting between nervous yellow and determined blue. Remember what we practiced. Don't try to force the connection. Shape it, like you did yesterday. Sarah nodded, trying to keep her breathing steady, just like tuning a radio, right? Exactly. Zilix's form settled into a calming blue. Ready when you are. Professor Xental turned to address the observation deck. Honored members of the board, today we attempt the first controlled consciousness merge between a symbionite and a human. Previous failures have led many to conclude such merges are impossible. However, our research suggests human consciousness operates on different principles than previously understood. Sarah closed her eyes as the neural interface activated. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting for her to fail like all humans before her. Beginning consciousness wave adjustment, Zilixa announced. The familiar tingling started in Sarah's mind, stronger than during their practice sessions. On the massive displays above them, her neural patterns began shifting, trying to align with Zilix's consciousness waves. Neural alignment at 30%, 40%, Professor Xental reported. Murmurs rose from the observation deck as they passed the previous historical record for human symbionite alignment. Sarah focused on creating the specific, controlled pathways they had discovered. Instead of trying to open her mind completely like other species did, she carefully shaped the connection, like an artist sculpting clay. 60% alignment, 70%. The tingling intensified into a gentle pressure. Sarah could feel Zilix's presence growing clearer, like a radio signal coming into tune. But unlike their practice sessions, something felt different this time. Better, clearer. 80% alignment. Neural stability holding steady. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Sarah gasped as Zilix's consciousness connected with hers, not in the overwhelming flood that other species experienced, but in a carefully controlled stream of thoughts and sensations. I can see. Zilix's voice came both through the air and directly into Sarah's mind. I can see how humans think. It's beautiful. The audience watched in amazement as the displays showed something unprecedented, a human mind actively directing and shaping a consciousness merge, maintaining clear boundaries while still achieving perfect connection. 95% alignment, 98%. Full alignment achieved. Professor Xental announced, their voice filled with excitement. Neural patterns are stable. And, wait, this is extraordinary. Through their connection, Sarah could feel Zilix's thoughts and memories. But instead of being overwhelmed, she could choose which ones to explore, like turning pages in a book. More incredibly, she could share her own thoughts with the same precision. The human consciousness isn't just accepting the merge. Professor Xental explained to the stunned audience, it's actively directing it. This level of control is unprecedented in any known species. Sarah opened her eyes, maintaining the connection with Zilixa. The room looked different now. She could see both the physical world and the beautiful patterns of consciousness that symbionites perceived. Through their link, Zilixa was experiencing human sensations for the first time. The feeling of having a solid form, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. This is impossible, one of the board members stated. Humans lack the neural complexity for consciousness sharing. No, Sarah said, her voice strong and clear. We just do it differently. Instead of broad, open sharing, we evolved for precision and control. We're not primitive. We're specialized. Through their connection, she felt Xylox's joy and pride. They had done it. They had proven that humanity's supposed weakness was actually a unique strength, and this was just the beginning. Demonstration successful, Professor Xentel declared, to growing applause from the observation deck. History has been made today. 3 days after the successful demonstration, Sarah could hardly walk through the Academy's corridors without being stopped by curious students and faculty. The news had spread faster than a quantum transmission across the galaxy. Humans weren't consciousness blind after all. They were consciousness selective. Sarah. A group of floating crystal beings called out as she made her way to Laboratory 12. Is it true that humans can control the depth of consciousness sharing? Before she could answer, the voice chimed in from behind her. Not just control it. Xyloxa said, their particle form shimmering with pride as they floated up beside Sarah. They can shape it. Watch this. Sarah smiled as Xyloxa's consciousness gently touched hers. They had gotten much better at it with practice. Through their connection, she shared a simple memory of Earth's ocean, but instead of overwhelming Xyloxa with the entire experience, she carefully selected specific sensations. The sound of waves, the smell of salt air, the feeling of sand between toes. The crystal beings chimed in amazement as they watched the neural displays, showing the precise control of the sharing process. That's incredible. One of them sparkled. Our species shares everything at once. We never imagined consciousness could be curated like this. Sarah and Xyloxa continued to their lab, which had been upgraded to accommodate the stream of researchers wanting to study their breakthrough. Professor Xentel was already there, speaking with a holographic projection of what appeared to be a symbionite elder. Ah, perfect timing. Professor Xentel gestured with multiple limbs. Elder Vixna was just discussing the medical applications of your discovery. The elder's particle form glowed with a formal purple hue. The ability to share specific memories or emotions while maintaining boundaries. It could revolutionize trauma therapy across species. We've never had such precise control before. And that's not all. Another voice added. Dr. Morell, the Academy's head of xenopsychology, emerged from behind a bank of equipment. The educational possibilities are extraordinary. Imagine being able to share complex concepts one layer at a time, instead of all at once. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with consciousness sharing. What had started as an attempt to prove humans weren't primitive had turned into something far more important. We're already receiving requests from medical facilities across 3 sectors, Professor Xentel announced, pulling up a holographic map dotted with glowing points of interest. They want to study how this controlled sharing could help patients with consciousness-related conditions. And the Galactic Education Council is interested too, Xyloxa added excitedly. They think this could change how we teach everything from xenobiology to quantum mechanics. Sarah watched as more requests poured in through the Academy's communication system. Research institutions, medical facilities, educational centers, all wanting to learn about the human way of consciousness sharing. There's something else, Professor Xentel said, their voice taking on a more serious tone. The Academy Board has made a decision. They're establishing a new department, Human Symbionite Consciousness Studies. Sarah's eyes widened. A new department? But that's unprecedented for a first-year discovery. Yes. Professor Xentel's multiple eyes crinkled in what Sarah had learned was their version of a smile. They want you and Xyloxa to help lead the research, under faculty supervision, of course. Us. Xyloxa's particles swirled in excitement. But we're just students. Students who just revolutionized our understanding of consciousness sharing, Dr. Morell pointed out. Sometimes the freshest perspectives lead to the biggest breakthroughs. As Sarah looked around the lab, at the supportive professors, the eager researchers, and especially at Xyloxa, her friend and partner in this amazing discovery, she realized something important. They hadn't just proven that humans were different. They'd shown that different could be better, that evolution could take many paths to reach amazing destinations. So, Xyloxa floated closer, their particles dancing with anticipation, ready to change the galaxy again. Sarah grinned, one controlled connection at a time. 1 year had passed since the first successful human-symbionite merge. The Academy's newest building, the Center for Consciousness Studies, gleamed in the light of the three suns. Inside, Sarah stood before a group of new students, humans and aliens alike, preparing to give her first lecture as a student researcher. When I first came to the Academy, Sarah began, looking at the diverse faces before her, everyone thought humans were consciousness blind. They called us primitive, closed off, evolutionarily stunted. She smiled. Turns out, we were just tuned to a different channel. Beside her, Xylox's particle form shifted to a warm golden color, their teaching mode, as Sarah had come to know it. Together, they had taught over 50 students the new consciousness-sharing techniques they'd developed. Today, we're going to demonstrate something extraordinary, Xyloxa announced, something that wouldn't have been possible a year ago. Sarah nodded to a group of students in the front row, 3 humans and 2 symbionites. They had been practicing for weeks for this moment. As the class watched, the 5 students began to merge consciousness, not in the traditional overwhelming flood, but in a carefully choreographed dance of thoughts and emotions. The neural display above them showed something beautiful, 5 distinct consciousness patterns, each maintaining its unique structure while sharing specific, chosen connections with the others. It looked like a mental symphony, each mind playing its own part in perfect harmony. This is what we call structured consciousness integration, Sarah explained, watching the patterns dance above. It combines human precision with symbionite fluidity, and it's changing everything we thought we knew about interspecies communication. Professor Xentel, now the head of the new department, stepped forward. In the past year alone, we've seen applications we never imagined possible. Medical breakthroughs in trauma therapy, revolutionary teaching methods, even new forms of art created through controlled consciousness sharing. The displays shifted to show recordings from various institutions across the galaxy. A hospital where a human therapist was helping a traumatized symbionite by sharing calming memories one gentle layer at a time. A classroom where complex quantum physics concepts were being taught through precisely controlled consciousness sharing. An art gallery where human and alien minds collaborated to create stunning mental sculptures. But perhaps the most important discovery, Xyloxa added, their particles forming patterns of excitement, was learning that evolution doesn't follow a single path. What we thought was a human limitation was actually a sophisticated adaptation. Sarah stepped forward again. Human consciousness evolved for precision rather than breadth. We developed the ability to form deep, controlled connections instead of broad, open ones. Neither approach is better. They're just different solutions to the same challenge of connecting with others. The class watched as the student demonstration concluded, each participant slowly separating their consciousness while maintaining perfect control. Their faces showed wonder and achievement, humans and aliens working together in ways that had seemed impossible just a year ago. Last week, Sarah continued, the Galactic Council officially recognized controlled consciousness sharing as a distinct evolutionary achievement. They're calling it the human contribution to galactic science. She paused, looking at her friend and research partner. But Xyloxa, and I know it's more than that. It's proof that the best discoveries happen when different species work together, when we stop seeing differences as flaws and start seeing them as opportunities. As the lecture concluded and the students began to file out, many of them already practicing the basic techniques they'd learned, Sarah felt a gentle touch on her consciousness. Xyloxa sharing a moment of pride and friendship. You know what's funny? Xyloxa said, both through their connection and aloud. A year ago, I begged to try you on, to merge with your consciousness. I had no idea that you'd end up teaching me, teaching all of us, a whole new way to connect. Sarah smiled, sending back a wave of affection through their link. Maybe that's the biggest lesson here. Sometimes the best way to understand each other isn't to become the same, but to celebrate how we're different. Above them, the neural displays continue to dance with patterns of human and alien consciousness, each unique, each valuable, all connected in their own perfect way.